All right, let's begin the third video in our series of looking at the world religions of the ancient world. First, a quick apology about last Thursday's Zoom. I have no idea what happened. My internet just died. Very sorry about that. Maybe we can have Zoom class meetings this week. I hope we're going to schedule them same as we always do. We'll hope for the best. In the first two videos, I did an introduction, and then we looked at Hinduism, where you follow your dharma to get good karma, to be reincarnated into a higher varna, so you can be reunited with Brahman. We looked at Buddhism. Siddhartha Gautama looking for the answer in his Hindu world. Why is there so much suffering? And he becomes the Buddha after discovering all the suffering in the world. And he creates a body of works. One group of writing are known as the Four Noble Truths, and then you have the Eightfold Path. And through these two writings, we understand that the Buddhists understand that there is suffering and that there is a way to stop suffering. According to Siddhartha Gautama, according to the Buddha, suffering comes from desiring worldly things, so you just stop wanting things, and that's where the Eightfold Path comes in. And tying both of those things back into the number one unstated objective that we have when we look at these world religions, and all of history really, but the world religions in particular, is respect. Armed with what little bit, and believe me, we're just scratching the surface, but armed with a little bit we know now, if you meet a person who is a practicing Hindu or who is a Buddhist, you know enough to respect or give a little room in the academic setting for people who believe in things like reincarnation or seeking for nirvana, this state of mind where after following the Eightfold Path you no longer desire worldly things, and the sacredness of life, according to the belief of this one universal spirit, Brahman. And so today what I want to do is I want to try to combine two religions in one video. Now I want to say from the beginning, there's no way I can do all of this. This, as I've said several times, this would be weeks in class. And so what I want to do is following the idea of learning how to show respect, particularly in the academic setting, but respect overall. I want to talk about the two more religions in this video and give us enough so that we can be respectful should we find ourselves in a position where we're in a class or in an academic setting with someone who studies or who follows these faiths. So the first two are Hinduism and Buddhism, about as far outside the world experience of most of my students as you can get. Today's video is on two more religions, and they are a little bit more familiar to the people that I teach, and they are Islam and Judaism. Now, Islam and Judaism have a few things in common. The most important thing is that unlike Hinduism and Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, and when we do Christianity, and then the wrap up in the next video, the last three religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, are what we call monotheistic. They believe in one God. Hinduism and Buddhism have a pantheon of emanations or avatars of Brahman that they call gods. And so they have many, many, many gods. But in Islam today and in Judaism today, which is what we're looking at, we need to understand that some of the common ground is that they have one God. Also, Islam and Judaism share some people. They have the same cast of characters. For instance, a good example would be Abraham. Both Islam and Judaism recognize Abraham, so that's important. I want to start off with Islam. It is the youngest of the world religions. It's the baby. It was founded in the Arabian Peninsula in the late 500s AD and early 600s AD. And so let's start with Islam. Islam, we, again, like Buddhism, we had a founder, Siddhartha Gautama, who becomes the Buddha. We have a founder. The founder of Islam is Muhammad. He was born in 570 A.D. and he lived in the city of Mecca. That's where they were based. He was from a family of merchants. Wasn't super wealthy, but they were well to do. Um, and as Muhammad grew up, he began to notice things around him, very much like there's a little bit of connective here between Siddhartha Gautama and Muhammad. They looked around at the world and they didn't like what they see. Now, in Muhammad's case, he saw greed, he saw dishonesty, he saw a neglect of the poor, he saw the family not being in the place where it should be, and it greatly troubled him. In the early 600s AD, he began to pursue what this meant or what could be done about this. And in 610 AD, while he was praying in a cave, according to Islamic tradition, he heard a voice and he heard a vision. And from that point, he founded the religion known as Islam. Now, the word Islam means surrendering to the will of Allah. And Allah is the God of Islam. A lot of people ask me, is Allah the God of Judaism and the God of Christianity? Strictly speaking, in an academic sense, the answer would have to be no, because of who who Islam says Jesus is. Christianity and Islam have a completely different understanding of the person of Jesus of Nazareth, and in between Judaism and Islam, you'd be hard pressed to find a Jew who would say that Yahweh, the God of Abraham, and Allah are the same. So academically speaking, now it's probably not, but anyway, Islam means surrendering to the will of Allah, who is the God of Islam. And Muhammad began to preach the idea of surrendering to the will of Allah. And he went back home to Mecca, and his family was converted as he began to preach his message, and the poor were attracted in Mecca. But the wealthy of Mecca, they didn't like this. They thought that what Muhammad was doing was a challenge to their authority. So in 622, Muhammad leaves Mecca and he goes to the city of Yathrib. And that is the year of breaking off relations. It's also year 1 on the Muslim calendar. And in Yathrib, he is welcomed as and he's welcomed as the prophet of Muhammad. Now, Muhammad is welcomed as the prophet of Allah. A prophet is a person who carries God's message to people, and so we see those in Christianity, in Islam, and in Judaism. Muhammad is the prophet of Allah, and he goes to Yathrib, and the message is received much, much better in Yathrib. In fact, the city actually changes its name from Yathrib to Medina. Medina means city of the prophet. And from there, Muhammad begins building what history calls the Islamic State, using the power of the government to uphold Islam. Now, people who practice Islam are called Muslims. It's Buddhists. Buddha is Buddhists, and Hindu is pantheon of gods. Christianity of Jesus of Nazareth. Judaism, that's what the name that they got from where they were from, that tribe. But in Islam, the people who practice Islam are called Muslims. From 622 on, Muhammad begins to build his Islamic State, and he does this through military means, and everywhere he conquers, the people are compelled to convert to Islam. And the main tenets of Islam, the main things that I want you to know about Islam, are what Islam calls the 5 pillars of faith. These are found in the holy book of Islam, which is a book called the Quran. The 5 pillars of Islam are prayer, fasting, giving to the poor or charity, belief. There's a prayer that is cited with belief, and then the pilgrimage. The pilgrimage is one I want to touch on really. So those are like, if somebody were to say, what's the most important things to know about Islam? Those 5 things, the 5 pillars of Islam, are the most important things that you can know about Islam. And again, they are, let me make sure I got them right: belief, prayer, charity, fasting, and then the pilgrimage. Let's talk about the pilgrimage real quick. Um, According to the Islamic text of the Quran, according to the Quran, if you are physically able and you have the means, the monetary means, you need to make a pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca at least once in your lifetime if you practice Islam. Now, if there are medical reasons or if there are financial reasons that you can't go, you're not penalized for it, but that is very, very important. Islam's making the pilgrimage to Mecca. When Muhammad dies in 632 AD, he does not have a clear, like laid out, planned successor. And this is where we get the branches in Islam. Now, as we remember, in Buddhism, you have the Theravada Buddhists who believe that the Buddha is a teacher, and the Mahayana Buddhists who believe that the Buddha was a god. In Islam, you'll have 2 varieties of people who practice Islam, two varieties of Muslims. You have the Shia and you have the Sunni. The Shia Muslims believe that the person who should have followed Muhammad as caliph, and that's just a word that means successor. That's all the word caliph means. The person who should have been caliph, the leader of the religion after the death of Muhammad, should have been Ali. That was Muhammad's son-in-law. And from Ali, it should have been just relatives, and it should only be Muhammad's line who control the Islamic faith, who rule over that faith. The Shia Muslims, and that's the biggest group, they disagree. They believe that the people who chose the first 4 caliphs after Muhammad died, who were all close friends of Muhammad, so that was relatively easy. After those 4, you have a really strange word. You have the Umayyad caliphs. Now, the Umayyads are just a group of rulers who were chosen and who ended up spreading Islam throughout the Arabian Peninsula. It got very, very large into Spain and different places. So the Shia believe that the successor or the caliph should have been Ali and then somebody related to Muhammad, and the Sunni believe that the caliphs that were chosen and then the Umayyad caliphs after the 4 who were close friends with Muhammad, that they should be the leaders. Doesn't mean the Sunni always agree with what the caliphs, Umayyad and otherwise, said to do, but they believe that that's who they should follow. Islam is a very, very large religion today. And the other thing, the last things I want to mention briefly about Islam is that Islam is not just a religion. Islam is a world view. They have, of course, their holy book. They have the political aspect, the Islamic State, and they have their own law. It's called Sharia law. They have their own courts that try cases according to their own religious laws. And so it's very, very much, Islam is very, very much a world view. Okay, the second one, briefly as I know how, is Judaism. Now, we have already covered early in the year the Jewish people. And so this one will be a little bit of review and then reminding you what was important to them, and then we'll end the video. In the 1200s BC, now let's go way back, there's a lot going on in Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent overall. One of the things that happened was that the God of Abraham told Abraham, living in beautiful downtown Ur, grab your family, pack everything up, and I'm going to bring you to a land that I will give you to be your own, and I will make you the father of a great nation of people, big family. Those are the 2 promises that the God of Abraham made Abraham. So, interestingly, as we reflect back on Judaism, we have patient zero, the very first Jewish person, Abraham. Um, we also remember that in class, and I'm going to post some of this on Classroom, we remember in class that there was a line of patriarchs. You had Abraham, and you had his son Isaac. The word Isaac means laughter. Then you had Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. And Jacob had 12 sons, and so the sons of Jacob became the sons of Israel. And one of them was Joseph. And Joseph was not the most popular with his brother for some pretty good reasons. And he was sold into slavery, ends up down in Egypt. Then, because of a famine and Joseph revealing himself to his brothers, everybody, all of Israel, or Jacob, and all the wives and everybody come down to Egypt. And the Egyptians eventually, over some generations, forget, why are these people who are not Egyptians here? And they're enslaved. Then you have Moses, who comes down, let my people go, 10 plagues. They come back to the promised land. And once in the promised land, the Jews are ruled by a group of judges. You have the law of God, the Ten Commandments and the law of God, which Moses got from Mount Sinai. And then you have the judges who administer God's law among the tribes, and people weren't happy with it. So they said they wanted a king. And they were told, look, if you get a king, he's going to enslave you and overtax you. And say, we want a king. There are people around. Some people moved in since we were in Egypt. They've got kings. We want a king. So their first king was Saul. Second king, David, greatest king that Israel ever had. Third king, Solomon. After the death of Solomon, Israel splits. You have the kingdom of Israel in the north, 10 tribes, and you have Judah, 2 tribes in the south. And the capital of Judah is Jerusalem. We find that the Jewish people will be conquered not just by the Babylonians, not just by the Assyrians, but by the Greeks in 331 BC, and finally by the Romans in 62 BC. When the Romans conquer Israel, the Jewish religion is tolerated, especially there in Jerusalem. They rename it Judea because Romans jam vowels into things. And that's where we get the 4 groups that I'm going to talk about in just a minute for Judaism. What are the key tenets of Judaism? Well, of course, the 10 Commandments. I think we talked about those in class, if you remember the 5th commandment. On page 143 in the textbook, you can familiarize yourself with those again. But not only do the 10 Commandments teach that not even the leaders are above the law, but it establishes this idea of the rule of law, which will be carried forward and finally brought to America. But the 10 Commandments are a part of the law of Moses, which is the way that the Israelites govern themselves. Now, since they were conquered by the Assyrians, and then the Babylonians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans, they have not been in control of their own government, political government, in a long time. Socially, they've been run by a group of priests called the Sanhedrin, and they're over the social and religious aspect of the Jewish people. And also important in Judaism are their feasts. A good example of a feast would be the Feast of Passover. Feast of Passover is celebrated remembering the Exodus, or when the Jews left Egypt and went back to the Promised Land. The meal that they eat, every bit of the meal is symbolic. It's called the Seder. So those are some pretty important things in Judaism. Now, as far as groups, in class, the way I do this is there are 4 groups of Jews during the Roman occupation that I would want you to know about. And they are the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and the Zealots. For the purposes of the distance learning that we're doing, we can just know that there were the wealthy Sadducees and the very, very pious, and you could say kind of by the book, Pharisees. The Essenes left, and then you have the Zealots. The Zealots are the group of people who want to get rid of the Romans by whatever means it takes. In 66 AD, the Zealots will actually provoke a rebellion against the Romans. In 70, the Romans will come in to crush that rebellion and destroy the temple. And in 136 AD, the Romans will, in putting down another rebellion, expel or kick all of the Jews out of Jerusalem. They can never come back. And as a last slap in the face, they change the name of Judea to a name that sort of points to their worst enemies, the Philistines. They changed the name from Judea to Palestine, from the Philistines. And so, but the Jewish people, they're the Jews of the diaspora. They dispersed everywhere. And they are still a major world religion today. They were allowed back into what is now Israel after the end of World War II, so they do finally have a homeland again. But they have been a persecuted people throughout history, and their resilience is remarkable. And they pass their traditions through religious leaders such as rabbis. I will make sure that I post a little bit of supplemental information to help you with the assessment on Islam, on the 5 pillars, and on Judaism, the 4 groups, and a little bit about the 10 Commandments. So we have one more religion to go and then a wrap up.